A Midsummer Night's Truth, The Frame. They call them fairy tales as if the fae have a tale. I can tell you that none have met a fae for true, or they wouldn't smile when they say it. Tales.stories. Like something that ends when you close the book. I wasn't even there. That's what keeps me awake, you understand? I wasn't in those woods on Midsummer Eve. Never set foot past the tree line. I was safe in Athens, sleeping sound in my bed while they... But Peter told me, poor Peter. Peter Quince, the carpenter. Came back wrong, came back knowing. And he needed to tell someone, needed to make someone else carry the weight of what he'd seen because carrying it alone was going to kill him. So he told me, over wine that turned to ash in my mouth as he spoke. And now I carry it. Now I see them in the corners. Not the fae themselves. I'm not cursed with that, thank Christ, or whoever still listens. But I see the spaces where they could be. The shimmer, the threshold. It's the way a doorframe catches light wrong. How shadows pool under tables even when the candles burn steady. That feeling when you're walking home and realise you can't quite remember the last 3 streets you passed. That's them. That's their fingerprints on reality. You want the story? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. Some stories don't end when the telling stops. Pour me another drink first. My hands shake less when I'm holding something. Into the woods. Peter and his troupe, the mechanicals they called themselves, working men who dreamed of art, they went into the woods outside Athens to rehearse. Simple as breathing. Woods are just woods, right? Trees and dirt and maybe a deer or two. They'd been in woods before. Every man there had hunted, had gathered, had walked under branches without consequence. But not on Midsummer Eve, not in those woods. Peter said they knew something was wrong within the first 100 paces. The light went strange. Not dark. The sun was still high, longest day of the year, but the quality of it changed. Like looking at the world through old glass, everything slightly bent, colours not quite matching what your mind said they should be. The paths moved, Peter told me, his hands white-knuckled on his cup. Not while you were watching. Never while you were watching. But you'd mark a tree, turn around, and it would be elsewhere. Or you'd be elsewhere. The distinction stopped mattering. Bottom made jokes at first. That's who Bottom was. Nick Bottom, the weaver, big voice, big laugh, big fool who thought confidence could armour him against anything. He did his pratfalls, made the others laugh, did a bit from their play. Pyramus calling for his love, comic and tragic at once. The woods listened, that's what Peter said. Not that they were watched. Watched implies eyes, implies intention you can comprehend. The woods listened, and in listening became aware of them. Became aware of desire and dreams, and the small desperate human need to be seen, to matter, to transform into something greater than you are. The fae trade in transformation, but they never ask what you want to become. They only ask what you fear becoming. And then they make it true. They found their clearing, set up their rehearsal space. Robin Starveling strung rope between trees for their stage curtain. Snug the joiner built them a crude throne from fallen branches. Tom Snout marked out entrances and exits with stones. They were building a theatre in the fae's domain, and didn't even know it. Architecture is invitation, structure is ritual. They were making a stage, and the fae love nothing more than a good performance. The lovers arrive. Then the nobles came, Peter said, and his voice dropped. 4 of them, stumbling through the undergrowth like they'd forgotten how legs worked. Fighting, gods the things they said to each other. Hermia and Lysander, running from arranged marriage. Helena following Demetrius, who followed Hermia, who wanted none of him. A knot of desire and rejection and desperation, all tangled up in the certainty that love, or the absence of it, was the worst thing that could happen to any of them. They didn't know, couldn't know. When you're young and your heart is breaking, you think that's the deepest wound existence can deliver. You don't know that there are older hurts, stranger agonies, violations that don't even have names in human languages. Peter and the others hid. Not from the nobles, from the feeling in the air. Something had changed when the lovers entered the clearing. The light got thicker, the shadows got interested, and from somewhere in the canopy above, laughter. Not human laughter. Peter was very specific about this. It sounded like laughter the way a painting of food looks like eating. All the shape of it, none of the substance. Laughter that had never been joy, only the mimicry of joy, the mockery of it. A voice from the trees. What fools these mortals be. And there he was. Puck Robin Goodfellow. The Puck. depending on which old woman you ask and how much she's had to drink. But Peter said none of those names capture it. Said he looked like a beautiful boy until you saw his eyes, which were older than Athens, older than Greece, older than the first human who looked at the moon and wondered if something looked back. He moved wrong, Peter whispered, like he was deciding how to move each time, choosing which way joints should bend. Like his body was a costume he hadn't quite figured out how to wear yet. Puck crouched on a branch above the lovers, watching them argue about who loved whom and who deserved what, and he smiled. Peter said that smile is burned into his memory, that he sees it sometimes in the mirror when he's not expecting it, and he has to look away before he starts believing it's his own face smiling back. "Lord, what fools these mortals be," Puck said again, like a child with a new toy, testing how it sounds, savouring the words. "Shall we make them more foolish? Shall we make them dance?" The transformation begins. That's when Bottom screamed. Peter was watching the nobles, watching Puck so he didn't see it start. Just heard Bottom make a sound no human throat should produce. Not pain, not exactly, but the sound of someone realising their body is no longer theirs to command. Bottom was changing. His face went first, Peter said, and his hands shook so badly he had to set his drink down. Not all at once. Not like a spell in stories where there's a flash and suddenly you're different. Slow. Incremental, like watching clay being reshaped by invisible hands. The bones shifted under the skin, jaw extending, broadening, nose and mouth pushing forward into a muzzle, ears crawling up the sides of his skull like living things, growing long, growing furred. Bottom kept trying to speak, kept trying to call for help, but his tongue was changing too, thickening, and the words came out wrong. "Hee-haw," Bottom said, and the horror in that sound, the human consciousness trapped behind it, aware, screaming inside. Peter said he'll hear it till he dies. The troop scattered, ran, all except Peter, who climbed a tree and clung there, too terrified to move, watching his friend become something else. Bottom's hands twisted into hooves, his back bent, restructured. Hair spread across his body like spilled ink, coarse and dark. But his eyes stayed human, stayed Bottom's eyes, aware and terrified and still in there, while everything else rewrote itself into ass, into donkey, into beast of burden. Bottom tried to run and his new legs didn't know how. Got up, fell again, made those awful sounds human thought trying to pass through animal throat. And from the trees, Puck's laughter, delighted, ancient, infinite. "The audience demanded a performance," Puck said. "So perform." And Bottom did, had to. His body moved without his permission, pulled by invisible strings, dancing like the beast he'd become. Braying and kicking and stumbling through some grotesque parody of their rehearsed play, while his eyes screamed and screamed and screamed. That's when Peter saw her, the Queen. The Queen and the Changeling. Titania arrived like weather, not walking, manifesting. One moment the clearing was empty, save for the transformed Bottom, the scattered lovers, the hiding troop. The next, she was simply there, reclining on a throne of living flowers that grew and bloomed and died and regrew as she shifted her weight. Beautiful. Peter was very clear about that. So beautiful it hurt to look at her, like staring at the sun. But also wrong. Beauty that had nothing to do with human aesthetics, that operated on principles that predated human existence. She was beautiful the way a deep ocean is beautiful, vast and uncaring and absolutely lethal if you forget what you're looking at. Her court surrounded her, dozens of them. Hundreds. Manifesting from behind trees, dropping from branches, rising from the earth itself. Each one perfect and terrible and off in ways Peter couldn't articulate. "Like paintings of people," he said. "All the details right, but something missing. The thing that makes a person alive rather than just animated." And she looked at Bottom, at the braying, stumbling, horrified thing that had been Nick Bottom, and she wanted him. "Come to me, sweet mortal," she said, and her voice was honey and thorns. "Come and rest your beautiful head upon my lap." Bottom couldn't refuse. His new body moved toward her, jerking like a puppet, while his human mind thrashed inside. She stroked his long ears, ran her fingers through his coarse mane, cooed at him like a mother with a child. But not her child, never her child. That's when Peter saw him, tucked in the shadows of her throne. The boy, the human boy, couldn't have been more than 5, maybe 6 years old. Dark skin, dark eyes, absolutely silent, dressed in finery that looked like it had been made for him, but sat wrong, like he'd forgotten how to wear clothes that weren't leaves and spider silk. The changeling, the child at the centre of it all. Oberon wants him, Puck explained to no one, to everyone dancing through the clearing. Wants him for his court, his knight, his prize. But Titania loves him too well. Loves him the way the snake loves the mouse. Loves him the way winter loves the harvest. Won't give him up, even for her king. The boy didn't react. Didn't look at Bottom or the Queen or anything at all. Just stood there, swaying slightly, like a tree in wind that wasn't blowing. How long has he been here? I asked Peter when he told me this part. That's the wrong question, Peter said. Time doesn't... They don't experience it like we do. The boy might have been there a day or a decade or a century. Might have been born in those woods or stolen last Tuesday. There's no way to know. There's no way to ask. But someone had loved that boy once. Someone human had held him, named him, sang him to sleep. And now he stood in the court of Titania, silent and swaying, loved so intensely by something that couldn't love that it had hollowed him out and filled the space with itself. Titania kissed Bottom's furry head and called him her sweet fool. And Bottom's human eyes wept while his donkey face couldn't. The lover's violation. While Titania claimed her prize, Oberon arrived. The king of the Fae didn't announce himself, didn't need to. The air changed pressure, the way it does before storms. The shadows deepened even though the light didn't change. And there he was, tall and crowned with antlers that might have been real or might have been something else wearing the shape of antlers, because that's what mortal minds could process. He looked at Titania with her donkey-headed fool and his changeling child, and something ancient and ugly passed between them. Not anger, anger is too human. This was older, possessiveness. Ownership, the fundamental disagreement between forces that had been having this argument since before humans built their first fire. Still you clutch the boy, Oberon said. Still you covet him, Titania answered. And between them, forgotten, the four lovers argued about who loved whom. Oberon smiled, Puck smiled wider. And Peter, watching from his tree, realised that the lovers were about to become the battlefield. A love in idleness, Oberon said, and Puck produced a flower, purple, innocent-looking. The kind of thing you'd see growing wild and never think twice about. Let's teach my queen about the folly of false affection. And while we're at it, he looked at the lovers. At Hermia, who loved Lysander. At Lysander, who loved Hermia. At Helena, who loved Demetrius. At Demetrius, who loved Hermia and despised Helena. Let's make it interesting. What happened next, Peter could barely describe. Puck moved through the lovers like wind through wheat, touching their eyes, their lips, their hearts. The flower's juice, if it was real at all, worked into them. And their faces changed, not physically, not like Bottom, but something behind their eyes shifted, rewrote. The thing that makes you you, the core of identity and choice and will, it twisted, bent, pointed in new directions like a compass needle forced the wrong way. Lysander woke first, saw Helena, and loved her. Loved her with the absolute conviction of truth, with the certainty of something that had always been and always would be. Never mind that 5 minutes ago he'd loved Hermia. Never mind anything. The flower said love Helena, and so he loved Helena, and his entire history rewrote itself to accommodate the new reality. You're the sun, Lysander told Helena on his knees, fervent. You're the only thing I've ever wanted. Helena, who'd loved Demetrius desperately, looked at Lysander and saw mockery. Saw cruelty. You're making sport of me, she said. I love you, Lysander insisted. And Peter said the worst part, the part that still wakes him up at night, is that Lysander meant it. Completely, utterly. Whatever the flower did, it didn't make him pretend. It made him believe. Rewrote his reality so thoroughly that the love was real, was true, was all he'd ever known. Then Demetrius woke. Same flower, same juice, same violation. Saw Helena and loved her. Both men now fighting over the woman they'd ignored, while Hermia watched the man she loved turn to someone else with absolute conviction. This is comedy, Peter said to me, his voice breaking. This is farce. Watching someone's will get overwritten, watching them become a puppet dancing to someone else's tune, and they can't even know it's happening because the knowing itself has been rewritten. The lovers fought, screamed at each other, declared love and hate and accusations with equal fervour, and above them, Oberon and Puck watched like men watching a play, entertained, amused, completely detached. "Lord, what fools these mortals be," Puck said again. And Peter realised this was always the game. The lovers were never people to them. Just pieces, just toys, just entertainment for things that had exhausted all other forms of joy centuries ago, and now had to make their own, no matter who it broke in the process. What was lost? Somewhere in all of this, Francis' flute disappeared. Peter didn't notice at first. Too busy watching Bottom's horror, the lover's violation, the Fey Court's terrible beauty. But when he finally looked around for the others, for Robin Starveling and Tom Snout and Snug the Joiner, he counted wrong. Came up short Flute. Little Francis Flute, the bellows mender, who was supposed to play Thisbe in their production. Youngest of them, barely 20, still had his mother's face. Gone, Peter called for him. Quiet at first, then louder as panic set in. The others joined him, the ones who'd hidden, who'd watched, who'd survived this far. They searched the clearing, the trees, the shadows. Called his name over and over. The Fae smiled. Lost something? Puck asked, and that's when Peter understood. The Fae don't just take children. They take whoever crosses their threshold, whatever interests them. Whoever forgets to follow the rules that humans shouldn't need to know. Flute had run, had fled when Bottom changed, and somewhere in the running he'd gone too deep. Past the clearing, past the boundary that Peter and the others had unconsciously respected, into the parts of the wood where the Fae don't just visit, but live. You could go look for him, Titania said, still stroking Bottom's ears. But the woods are deep, and time moves strangely here. You might search for a minute and emerge to find decades have passed. Or you might search for decades and emerge to find the night is young. Or you might not emerge at all, Oberon added. They found him 3 hours later, or 3 minutes, or 3 years. Peter said he'd lost his grip on time by then, that his pocket watch had stopped, and when he looked at it the hands were spinning backward. Flute was standing under an oak tree, perfectly still, eyes open but not seeing, breathing but not quite alive. His skin had started to change colour, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Taking on a greenish tint, like moss, like chlorophyll. When they touched him, he felt wrong. Temperature wrong, texture wrong. Like touching something that was learning how to be human flesh, but hadn't quite mastered it. "Francis," Peter shook him. "Francis, look at me." Flute's eyes focused slowly. Looked at Peter, through Peter. "Past Peter, the trees sing," Flute said. His voice sounded hollow, like speaking from the bottom of a well. "Can't you hear them? They've been singing so long. So long. They remember when the world was young. They remember when there were no humans to name them. They remember... Francis, we need to leave." Now, but Flute smiled. Not his smile. Something else wearing it. "Leave? Why would I leave? It's so beautiful here, can't you see? Can't you hear? They're calling me deeper. They want to show me things. Old things, true things. Things that humans forgot when they built their walls and cities and started believing they were separate from the green." Peter slapped him hard, trying to break whatever spell had hold. Flute's head snapped to the side, but when it came back, he was still smiling. "I could stay," Flute said dreamily. "I could stay and become part of it. Part of the singing. Wouldn't that be nice? To be part of something that never ends?" Tom Snout grabbed Flute's other arm. Together they started dragging him back toward where they thought the clearing was. Flute fought them, but weakly, like he'd forgotten how muscles worked. Like he was already halfway to being something else. They never found the clearing again. Not the one with Titania and Bottom and the lovers. It had moved, or they had moved, or the woods had simply rearranged itself because it could. What they found instead was an edge, a boundary, a place where the wrong light ended and normal moonlight began. They stumbled through it, dragging Flute, and suddenly they were out. Outside the woods, on the road to Athens, the city walls visible in the distance. They dropped Flute and turned around. The woods were still there, dark and deep, but something about the boundary was different now. Clearer, more absolute, like a door had closed that they'd passed through without noticing it had ever been open. "What about Nick?" Robin Starveling asked. "What about Bottom?" They stood there in the moonlight, staring at the woods, and nobody answered. Because what could they do? Go back? The door was closed. The threshold crossed, and Bottom was in there with the Queen who loved him wrong, performing his horror for an audience that would never let him leave. Flute started laughing, quiet at first, then louder. laughing and crying at the same time, curled up on the road, hands pressed over his ears like he was still hearing the trees sing. He never quite came all the way back. Even now, Peter said, Flute lives with his mother, barely speaks, spends his days standing in their garden with his hands in the dirt, swaying like a tree in wind that isn't blowing. The return of the changed? They say Bottom came back. That's the part that makes it into stories, into plays, into the sanitized versions. The weaver with the ass's head, who returns to his friends with wild tales of fairy queens and strange dreams. But Peter told me what actually returned. It was 3 days later by Athens time. The troupe was meant to perform at the Duke's wedding, but how could they? Bottom was gone, Flute was broken. The others could barely speak without their voices shaking. Then Bottom walked through Athens' gates. He looked like himself, sounded like himself. Same swagger, same big voice, same bottomness that had made him the centre of any room he entered. He told a wild story about falling asleep in the woods and having the strangest dream, something about a queen and flowers, and being worshipped like a god. It was just a dream, Bottom insisted, laughing. Mad, wasn't it? The imagination runs wild in those woods at night. The others stared at him. Peter especially, because Bottom was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just off. The way a copy is off. All the details right, but something missing. Don't you remember? Peter asked carefully. Your face had changed. You were a dream, Bottom interrupted, still smiling. Nothing but a dream, aren't I myself? Look at me. I'm Bottom, same as always. And he was. Physically, undeniably, he was Nick Bottom, weaver of Athens. But Peter said when he looked in Bottom's eyes, he saw something looking back that had learned to be Bottom. That was wearing Bottom like a coat. That spoke with Bottom's voice and moved with Bottom's walk, but didn't quite understand why humans did those things, only that they were expected. The teeth, Peter told me. His teeth were too even, too perfect. Like something had studied teeth and reproduced them exactly, not knowing that real teeth are never quite perfect. But nobody else noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. Because what do you say? Your friend came back from the fairy woods and something came back wearing his face. They performed the play. Bottom was brilliant, everyone said. Never better. His death scene as Pyramus was so moving it brought the audience to tears. Peter watched from backstage and felt sick. Because Bottom's performance was perfect, too perfect. Like something that had studied human emotion and could reproduce it flawlessly without ever feeling it. After the show, Bottom came to him smiling, put a hand on Peter's shoulder. Good show, eh? We did it. We really did it. And Peter said Bottom's hand was cold. Not ice cold, not obviously wrong. Just slightly the wrong temperature. Like something that had remembered humans are warm, but not quite how warm. Are you in there? Peter whispered. Nick, are you still in there? Bottom's smile didn't change. Of course I am. Where else would I be? And that was it. Bottom went back to his life, his work, his friends. As far as Athens was concerned, he'd had an adventure and returned safely. Lucky fellow, blessed even. Peter knew better. Whatever came back wasn't quite Bottom, and Bottom wasn't quite gone. He was in there somewhere, Peter thought, trapped behind someone else's control, like a prisoner in his own skull, watching something else live his life. Or maybe, and Peter said this part made him want to scream, maybe Bottom was gone entirely. Maybe the thing wearing him had simply learned him so thoroughly, copied him so perfectly, that the distinction between Bottom and not Bottom had ceased to exist. How would you know? How would you check? The Fae don't kill. That's too simple. They transform. They take and replace and make you wonder if there was ever a difference at all. The lovers' aftermath. The four nobles returned too. Hermia and Lysander, Helena and Demetrius. They remembered the woods, but like Bottom, they framed it as dream. Strange visions, too much wine, midsummer madness, but the love remained. Demetrius married Helena. The flower had done its work so thoroughly that he loved her with perfect devotion, never once remembering he'd pursued Hermia just days before. Helena loved him back, and their marriage was by all accounts happy. But Peter saw Helena once years later, saw her watching Demetrius across a crowded room with an expression he couldn't quite read. Love, yes, but also something else. A sadness, a awareness. Do you ever wonder, Helena said when she noticed Peter watching, if the person you love is really choosing you? Or if they're just following instructions they don't remember receiving, Peter had no answer. Lysander and Hermia married too. They'd loved each other before the woods, and after the flowers wore off, did they wear off? How would you know? They loved each other still. Same love or different love wearing the same name. That's the cruelty, Peter told me. Not that the Fae change you, but that they change you so completely you can't tell you've been changed. You go on living, loving, laughing, and somewhere in the back of your mind is the smallest doubt. Am I choosing this? Or was I made to choose this? And there's no way to know, no way to check. The violation is so complete it becomes you. The four of them lived their lives, had children, grew old together. Happy, by all measures that matter. But sometimes, Peter said, he'd see one of them pause mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-laugh. Just for a moment. Like they'd heard something nobody else could hear. Like they'd felt something shift. Like they were remembering a dream they'd had once. Something about woods and flowers, and a love that didn't belong to them but somehow did. And then the moment would pass, and they'd continue, and everything would be fine. Everything was fine. Everything is always fine, when you can't remember what fine used to feel like. The closing frame, the bard in the bar, me, I suppose, though I barely recognise myself in mirrors anymore, fell silent. Drained his cup, looked at his hands. That's the story Peter told me, I said. The true story. The one that happened while the rest of Athens slept safe in their beds, while I slept safe in mine. You're looking at me like I'm mad, I see it. The way you glance toward the door, calculating escape routes. The way you've shifted in your seat, putting distance between us. Good, you should run. You should forget this conversation, forget this story. Go back to believing that fairy tales are just tales, just stories, just harmless things with happy endings. But you won't forget, I can see it already. The way you're looking at the shadows in the corner. The way your eyes keep tracking to the door frame, checking if the angles look right. The way you touched your own face just now, checking if it still feels like yours. Peter gave the story to me because carrying it alone was killing him. And I'm giving it to you because I'm tired. So tired. Tired of seeing the shimmer in every reflection. Tired of wondering if the people I know are still themselves, or if something came back wearing their faces. Tired of knowing that the Fae are real and close and patient, and they don't need to touch you directly to ruin you. Sometimes the knowledge alone is enough. France's flute stands in gardens and sways. Bottom performs humanity without understanding it. The lovers love and wonder if their love is real. Peter drank himself to death 3 years ago, and even that felt like escape. And me, I'm here, in bars telling the story, passing it on like a curse, like a contagion, like a threshold you can't uncross once you've stepped through. I see them sometimes, not the Fae themselves. I told you I wasn't there, I'm not cursed with that. But I see the spaces where they could be, the shimmer between moments, the way time sometimes skips like a scratched record, the way people's eyes go distant when they think nobody's watching, like they're listening to something only they can hear. Midsummer comes around every year, the longest day, the shortest night, the threshold, and somewhere in the woods outside every city, in the places where the old wild still grows, they're waiting. Not for anything specific, not with any particular malice, just waiting, patient as stones, as trees, as the slow turning of seasons, waiting for someone to cross the boundary without knowing it's there. Waiting for someone to want something badly enough that they'll accept any price. Waiting for someone to believe that fairy tales are just tales, just stories, just harmless entertainments. They call them fairy tales as if the Fae have a tale. But you know better now. And knowing is its own kind of curse. The bard stood, left coins on the table and walked toward the door. Paused at the threshold, of course at the threshold, and looked back. Don't go into the woods on Midsummer Eve, he said. But you weren't going to anyway, were you? You're smarter than that, safer than that. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what Peter thought too. That's what Bottom thought. That's what I thought before Peter told me the story and made me see. The door opened. The night air rolled in, carrying the smell of growing things, green things, old things. Sweet dreams, the bard said, and left you alone with the story, the shadows and the question of what you'll see in the corners now that you know to look.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more. Share to help the channel grow.